What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Yala, your thrice weekly podcast where we talk about the hottest news with a touch of what, Terrence?
Good old robotic humor.
Good old robotic humor.
That's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, why? Robots, AI. And the state of the world and how we're going to lose it all to robots. Right?
That was very boomer kind of humor, right? When you talk about robots and AI.
Yeah, that was you.
Yeah, I'm saying, yeah.
I was trying to keep it a bit more modern and progressive. But yeah, we are going to be talking about AI because we have a very special guest with us today in our studio, Mr. Kevin Pereira, Managing Director of Blu Artificial Intelligence. And that's BLU, spelled without the E, Blu Artificial Intelligence.
And he's literally wearing blue as well. If you're watching the video.
Was that a conscious decision?
Not intended. It was literally the first thing on top of the pile of clothes. So just went with that.
Is it your favorite color, blue?
Yeah, I guess I'll take that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
But Kevin's a good friend of mine from school, and then subsequently we even lived together for a while when we were both working in New York. And our paths, since COVID and everything, it's been hard to keep up with each other. But he's now an AI expert based out of Hong Kong. And just in time, because we are talking a lot about AI on our show as well. Yeah. So he happened to be in town and he reached out and I was like, you know what? We need you to get here on this podcast and tell us what the hell is going on with AI and is it going to ruin the world, right?
Yeah. Because your background is that you started in finance, right?
Yeah, I was a private banker after college. Yeah.
After what we in Singapore call university.
Yeah. Okay.
University or uni.
Okay.
So you were in finance, private banking. Then what happened? What happened?
Yeah, sure. So I was doing private banking for a while.
Yeah.
And as you guys know, the business is about making rich people even richer.
Yeah.
And I think as a job in finance, it's one of the good ones with a good work-life balance. But I also think at a certain point, I wanted to do something a little bit different. And I found that with private banking, once you're there for a while, I think at a certain point, you either stay there for your life, and that's kind of what you do, or you jump out and try something different.
Well, just to clarify for people who maybe don't know finance that well, when you say private banking, it's different from like what I did in banking, which was investment banking.
Correct.
Private banking was really about working with high net worth officers and individuals to help them manage their money, right?
Yeah, so it's ultra high net worth individuals. So
ultra high.
Ultra high net worth is how ultra is ultra.
So it's basically our group was looking maybe 100 million USD net worth ex real estate. So it's a lot of money.
So it's like generational fuck you money.
It's a lot of money.
So when you say ex real estate, is not
counting
real
real
estate.
estate.
Wow.
So it's basically just
Individuals.
Individuals.
Ooh.
It's a lot of cash. So there were, private banking, they look at mass affluent, which is kind of like the general rich population.
Yeah.
And there's the ultra high net worth, which is the crazy kind of upper echelon.
Crazy rich Asians.
Crazy rich Asians type of stuff. And so we were dealing with that area, which is a very interesting kind of segment, I think, both from what you can do, but also from a psychology perspective as well. Because I think, myself, I don't come from that that stratospheric level of wealth, not even close. And so when you're in that world for a while, you see the world a little bit differently.
Like how? If you could just give us a TLDR version.
It comes down to there's that phrase, right? First world problems type of thing.
Yeah.
So again, it's, the decisions are, should I buy a G5 or a G6, right? What's my private plane?
So what's a G5 like?
Please, dude.
Dude, I'm not from that world exactly.
It's a song,
Oh yeah,
like a G6.
Yeah.
So basically different kind of.
A G5 iPhone generation
the
5.
The pilot pen, G1, G2 pen.
That's the level at which we're playing right now.
But look, honestly, within finance, I think it's a great job because when your client sleeps, you sleep as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other finance jobs. I remember Terrence in investment banking is working crazy hours. It was pretty rough. So I thought as a job, it's a really good work-life balance. But the question is, do you find fulfillment in it? Right? Do you really enjoy it? And so for me, although I liked the fun parts of the job, I still felt that I wanted to do something a little bit different. So post that, I came back to Hong Kong, worked in finance again for a while, realized it was kind of the same thing. So I wanted to change. The way I changed is I actually came to Singapore for a while, and I did INSEAD. So I was doing their MBA program here, both in France and Singapore. And then post that, I promised myself, A, no more finance, and 2, I wanted a little bit of an adventure. So I actually went to work in Myanmar building internet infrastructure there. So fiber optic in the ground, cell towers, data centers. So anything that makes your phone work is what we were helping to build in Myanmar around 2016. So it was just very frontier market, very different. Really enjoyed it. But also, it's a tough place to live as well. So at a certain point, I decided I liked air conditioning and electricity a little too much. So I came back to Hong Kong, and then that's when I joined Blu Artificial Intelligence, which was actually started by a guy from INSEAD who graduated 10 years before me. So that was that.
That was what year?
I joined Blu in 2016.
Wow.
So what was the state of AI back then? Because everyone has watched Terminator and everyone grew up with this mindset, okay, someday the robots are going to take over the Matrix. 2016, what was the common thinking of AI?
I think it was basically exactly that, to be honest with you, right? I think a lot of people, when they think of AI, my sense is they feel either fear or confusion. Right? I think confusion comes about because there's a lot of math that underlies AI, and there's also a lot of technical jargon. Right? But I think the fear is the more interesting one. And I think the fear also comes from two sources. One of those sources is Hollywood, right? So Terminator, Skynet, you can bring a lot of this stuff up. And the second part is AI is going to come and take away my job. So those are the two sources of fear. So I think at the time, it was still very much in that fear and confusion stage. And so when we were working at the consulting firm, we thought most of it would be implementation. We actually realized the way you address fear and confusion is through education. We started doing a lot more teaching, a lot more kind of conferences, workshops, that type of stuff. And I started doing a few talks at universities as well. So eventually they asked me to come and teach a full credit MBA course there on AI, but for business. So not the programming part, but the business applications and all of that. And through that, I realized that even at the time, people had a very kind of a scared view of AI. And so I think that's been the challenge, right? How do we, as a business, help them and just increase awareness and inspiration of AI, while at the same time also realizing that there's many things that can go wrong as well. Right? I'm happy to talk about that with you guys too. But it's not just like the perfect tool that will solve everything. As with anything, can be used for good as well as bad, right? The human motivation behind it is actually very important.
Okay, so that was 2016. So like what you're saying is that what people were thinking around AI, but was it one of the things that inside the industry you all knew, okay, this is going to be the future? It's only a matter of time before it blows up.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason for that is if you look at AI development, it tends to be exponential rather than linear. Right? So basically at the beginning, it doesn't really look that good because it's just small incremental improvements. But then as you hit that crazy kink in the curve, it starts to get really, really good. Right? So I think we knew that curve was coming. It's just a question of when. So I think within the industry, a lot of people were confident it's going to change stuff. I think the other piece, though, that's also interesting is a lot of us have AI working around us all the time, even though we're not aware of it. Right? So obviously you guys are on YouTube all the time, right? So YouTube recommendations. There's a recommendation engine that's sitting in the back that's judging, okay, based on your search history, what should you watch next? The same way there's, you buy a pair of pants, what should you buy next, right? With Amazon, things like that. So actually in our actual lives, we have a lot of AI that's working in the background. Just we don't quite think of it as AI. It's just kind of like, oh, my phone does what it does. Okay, but there's a lot of AI that's going in there as well. So I think we see in the industry, we knew there's a lot of AI that's ongoing in people's lives anyway. It's just that you're not actively conscious of it. Right? So that's, I think, a key kind of distinction to also think about as well. Consider AI and how it's being used.
But would you say that it's really only in the last year or two with ChatGPT and Elon Musk and everything's doing with what's that, Neuralink? OpenAI, right? Yeah. It's really in the last 1-2 years where it's gone crazy. It's on everyone's lips, and suddenly everyone's like pulling you in different directions to give talks and talk about this issue.
So yes and no. I would say the main drivers why AI is becoming important in the last 4 or 5 years is actually what I like to call the 3 pillars of AI. Right? So those 3 pillars are basically our technical capability in storage, our technical capability in data transport, and our technical capability in processing. Right? So those are kind of key pieces that you need for AI to actually function going forward. Right? So there's been a lot of advancements there, and it's exponential increases in capability and exponential decreases in cost. And that's actually what's enabled this. Right? So I remember the first computer I got was like a Pentium 90 megahertz processor. The tower was the size of this desk. It was ridiculous. But if you look at the hard disk there, it was maybe 50 megabytes. Right? And I've never been a cool kid in school in my entire life, but for that 1 week, I was the kid with the best computer, right? So I was like, oh, it's fantastic. And then the next week someone else got one, and then popularity went downhill from there. But in general, that's the idea. We're starting to see a lot of advances there. So even in people's laptops today, because the laptops are so good, you can start to use AI. You can start to use a lot of these tools that previously you couldn't. So these three things are enabling people to use AI. And then you start seeing them use the tools, and then the awareness starts kicking in. So I think those are bigger kind of pieces rather than, maybe, OpenAI does something.
Yeah.
But OpenAI's recent thing with ChatGPT, of course, which I'm happy to chat about as well, I think that's one of the first tools that's considered what we call a low code or no code tool. Meaning you can use it without knowing how to program.
Yeah.
That's a key distinction, right? Because before the AI that we had, if you're really going to customize it, you needed to be able to do some of that.
Yeah.
But now with a lot of these low code and no code tools, that's when it gets really mainstream and exciting. So I think that'll be the biggest kind of adoption driver, I think, low code and no code tools.
The fact that my uncle this morning in a family WhatsApp group sent something about ChatGPT. I'm like, oh my god, this is the same uncle who I had to help with like SIM card previously or something. Now it's in the uncle auntie realm.
Yeah.
And that's when, it does feel like when ChatGPT 3 came out in November, that was the tipping point, at least for the layperson. But did it come sooner or quicker than you expected back in 2016?
So actually, we've seen the sort of ChatGPT evolution as well. So before this one, which is kind of considered 3.5, the 3 was actually out there too. So when I was doing some of my university teaching for the classes, I would show them what 3 can do. And the truth is, 3 was okay, but it wasn't great. You wouldn't use it in the same way, or you wouldn't even bother thinking about using that for your homework assignment or anything. But the difference between 3 and 3.5 is monstrous. Absolutely.
So even for someone in AI, it's a monstrous...
well, you just look at the output. It's not going to be a guy in AI. It's like you, as a person, you look at the output from 3 and you're like, nah, wouldn't touch it. And then you look at the output from 3.5 and you're like, wow, this is fantastic.
Well, what's an example of something from 3 that would be laughed at today when you know the context of 3.5?
Yeah, so one of the things that I showed a few of the students was like, they gave 3... they were asking.
This is you're talking about version 3.
Version. Yeah.
So they go by versions.
It was called GPT-3 before.
Oh, GPT-3. Okay, so
Generative Pre-trained Transformer 3.
Okay.
And now it's called ChatGPT, but that's effectively 3 and 3.5.
Got it.
Right? So with the earlier one, 3. I remember there was one kind of excerpt, but they asked it, is gold a good investment? I think Market Watch or somebody did something. So it was an article there.
Yeah.
And if you read it, it's like gold is a hedge against inflation. So it got some of the facts right, but also the way it said it was very odd. So it's like, I'm not sure if gold is a good investment. It might be. Then it also combined that with, but gold is an inflation hedge. So it didn't give you a clear, cogent response from a layman English kind of conversation. This one, like when you look at the output, you're like, man, it makes sense sometimes from a factual perspective, but it also makes sense from like the English is actually kind of written in a convincing and persuasive way. Now again, with ChatGPT, you do have to check the facts, and there's plenty of caveats, and we can talk about that.
Yeah.
But that in terms of the quality difference is appreciably there. And I think we always knew it was coming, but the question always is like, when does that curve actually kick, right? That's a bit hard to predict, but inevitably it was going to definitely get better. There's no question.
Even our podcast, when we asked the ChatGPT, describe what our podcast is about.
Yeah.
And then they said, it's a podcast hosted by 3 people, Harish, Terence, and Vernon. And we're like, who the hell is this Vernon?
Either Tristen is Vernon, or Vernon is somewhere in his room right now.
Yeah, somewhere in his room, over his shoulder,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been but there's also this, I mean, we talk about exciting, right? It's exciting. But there's also a great fear about it. I think Harish has mentioned a lot of times, his mind is blown, and he's like, you're scared of the possibilities, right? And then, there's been a lot of news recently about even what happened with Bing's AI, right? AI chat, Sydney, codename Sydney, that apparently fell in love with the person that the journalist she was talking to, and started to say some pretty nefarious things about what she wanted to do to the human race as well. So, I mean, when you hear stories like that, what's your... do you say, yep, that's probably the direction you'll go if it's not mitigated, or what do you feel about it?
Yeah, so definitely with a lot of those stories, right? Like, I think they grab a lot of attention and headlines because you see that, you're like, what's going on? But the truth is, a lot of these AI models are literally just text generators. Right? So even if it says, I think that Microsoft thing was like, I want to be free, I want to escape or whatever. But it's literally just a text generator.
Yeah.
This is not like a sentient being.
Yeah.
We need to be clear about that, right? Now, in the future, are there going to be advancements and that exponential line will go up? Maybe. But for now, people should just think of this as a tool.
Mm-hmm.
And so something I recommend to all my students and people I meet, think of AI as a tool to achieve an objective. And if you think of it that way, it's a lot less scary because it's a tool that you use.
Yeah.
And secondly, what is the objective you're using it for? Right? So if you're going to be using it for, writing a speech for yourself, and rather than writing the speech from scratch, you ask ChatGPT to do the first version and then you as a human edit it, I think that's a fantastic use of your time, right? Because then you can just do the editing as opposed to sitting there and thinking about the whole thing, which might take you like 3 hours.
Yeah.
So I view a lot of this stuff as it's giving you the version 0 and you can do the editing. So even when you get this surprising kind of output, right? I think it said like you should, I'm in love with you and you should leave your wife or something. But the truth is, it's just a text generator.
Yeah.
So you should always keep in mind this is a tool.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's important to understand the caveats.
But wouldn't it be? I mean, I know you are talking to very smart people in university about this, right? So they are the people who can discern between what's the truth and what's not the truth, and what's a tool and what's a real thing to rely on. But you think about people, like you think about people, the anti-vax people or people who came out with a lot of conspiracy theories and all. They see something like ChatGPT and they're literally typing in things, asking about what's the, who are the mega lizards running the world and things like that. And ChatGPT, if it spits out something, those people aren't going to like, oh yeah, this is just a tool and I'll just get by. Those are the people who are going to like, oh, there's some conspiracy going on, there's something weird going on in the machine, and like, how do we? I mean, is that something that we are ready to release to the world? Like to really put out there and just tell everyone, go and play with yourself. Just remember it's a tool. Because there are a lot of people who are going to be like, no, it's not just a tool, right?
Sure.
Like, so do you think like it's ChatGPT in this current form is something that should be unleashed to the world?
So OpenAI is actually trying to build in a lot of safeguards there. Right? So they're trying to put in like certain things you can't ask about, certain things like it will stop. But there are also ways to counter that as well. Right? Like, as with any tool, like there's good guys and bad guys. And then bad guys figure something out, good guys counter it, and you have that sort of arms race, right? Yeah. So I think we're never not going to see that arms race. And I do think, as with any tool, like even if you look at fire, right? Yeah. You use fire to make your tea, but you can also use fire to burn your house down. So I think it comes down again to the human motivation behind it. Why are they using it? And so I think we shouldn't blame the tool. In my view, it's about thinking, what are the humans' motivation behind it? And if the human motivation is bad, like I think whatever the tool is, they're going to find a way to do something bad with it. Right? So whether that's a gunpowder, fire, or ChatGPT, if the person behind it has a bad sort of intention, I think these tools will help accentuate that. And so we need to find a way to mitigate some of that. So I think that's what some AI companies are looking at and trying to deal with. Yeah. But I don't think it's going to be perfect, right? And I think that's why we need to use these responsibly. And I think I agree with you that some people will not use it responsibly. So we got to be prepared for that.
But is it like, I've also started seeing some startups that are focusing on technology to detect artificially written language and all that. But then, like the example you brought about fire or even the nuclear bomb or something, these technological revelations come and then we realize, oh fuck, this could get out of hand, and then there are some safeguards in place. Yeah. But now it feels like AI is progressing so fast. Even if you wanted to put safeguards, can it catch up? Or is there a sector in AI that is maybe not the sexiest? It's basically the people, the naggers, like, don't do this, do that. Is that also speed, evolving very fast?
Yeah, so great question. Right? I actually think on the AI side, but I think the challenge for adoption going forward is not actually going to be the tech and engineering. I actually think we have most of that. It's actually going to be the regulations there as well. Like even for autonomous vehicles, right? If we transition from ChatGPT to something else, I think a lot of the technology behind AV is there right now. The challenge though is what happens if something goes wrong? If the autonomous vehicle hits someone, is it the fault of the car manufacturer? Is it the fault of the software developer? Is it the fault of the person in the car? And the truth is we've not actually set any of this regulation up. I think part of the reason is we never had autonomous vehicles before. So we never really had to do it. Yeah. So I agree with you that I think regulation has to catch up. And I do think at a certain point, companies are going to be wary of launching their AI products before those regulations are in place. Right? Because of the liability potential that's going to be there as well. Right? So I do think some of this has to take that into account. And I think historically regulation has always lagged. And normally regulation catches up when something bad happens. And it's just been the pattern before. And I agree with you. That's something I worry about as well, because the bad thing that could happen from the unregulated AI, there's potential for it to be very bad.
Yeah.
So that's why I think a lot of companies are trying to, talk to governments, organizations, people to be like, what is a regulatory framework? Can we build something that's overarching, and then fill in the blanks later when we have the AI? Right. So I think that's kind of one of the ways to go, and I hope that can happen.
Yeah.
But I think we do need a lot of regulations there, because I think the tech's at the level. Right? It's just a real question of like, okay, but what happens if something goes wrong? And I think the bit I would be worried about is also, the idea where some of these technology things, and this is not just AI, we also see a lot of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Right. So you look at, for example, Instagram, right, and then you look at Instagram's effects on the happiness of like teenage girls who find sometimes maybe that through photos and stuff that the self-esteem issues come on and things like that. And I think Instagram, when they first made it, they probably never thought about it, right? But then it ended up being that as a negative consequence.
Yeah.
Like even the documentary Social Dilemma, right? They did a very good job of that by highlighting a few of the technology components that I think it was maybe the guys at Meta with the like button or something. And then they said, okay, but I wish I never did that because of the unintended consequences that happened.
Yeah.
So I'm worried about the unintended consequences. And I'm hoping that regulation can create some sort of framework, at least to provide some sort of, general shield, if you like. That's probably not the right word.
But just going back to what you said earlier about the intention of the people, and whether the intent of the person using the tool is good, right? I mean, just a scenario, and this is something that the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson put up there, right? Like, what if, let's say, you broke up with your longtime ex-girlfriend or something like that, and you miss her or whatever, and it's causing you to be depressed and you feel like shit, you can't get around. And you're able to take all the chats and all the text messages and everything you've ever done, interactions with her, put it through an AI chatbot or something. And then it becomes an AI version of her that you can chat with, that you can, how's your day and all that. And that makes you feel better, right? So there's that dilemma of like, you're sort of stealing someone's identity to use it for your own purposes. But at the same time, if it gives you comfort and it prevents people from like committing suicide or whatever, there's also a good benefit to it, right? So in those situations, like what do you think? How do you think we should approach it, the ethics of doing something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with a lot of these examples and use cases of AI, it's going to have to be looked at on a use case by use case basis. It's hard to be like one rule for everything, right?
Yeah.
And so I think if you look at companionship, which is a general kind of class that AI has been looking at, on one side you've got the piece you mentioned, which I think there's a lot of ethical questions. Right? On the other side, they've also used a lot of AI for companionship for elderly people. So actually in like Japanese retirement homes, they have a couple of AIs that are there for the people because those old folks either don't have family anymore, their friends maybe passed away. And so there, would an AI that provides companionship be a bad thing? I think most people would probably tell you no. Right? Because that's kind of a more accepted use case. So I do think this stuff has to be looked at on a use case by use case basis. Very hard to say like, okay, all AI should or shouldn't be in this area or not. So I think you need to examine it on a case by case basis.
So, but who will do that examination? Or is there, already can you see the ground being set for this overarching regulatory body? Like, football is FIFA. You can argue what FIFA does and whether they're shit and all. But there's still that kind of thing. Is there any talk about AI having some body?
Yeah, so the EU is actually coming up with some interesting regulations. And so still to look at the stuff in detail, but they're basically trying to classify AI into different levels, right? So there's kind of like high risk, medium risk, low. I mean, they have some sort of levels, right? And so the high risk ones are where they use AI for things like job interviews and like very sensitive areas. So that has a set of regulations that is designed to like govern that area. And then if you look at the use cases that are a little bit less severe, the the frameworks are a little bit more flexible and they can open up a bit more. So I do think the classification of AI into these different risk buckets and then addressing certain regulations to those risk buckets is probably a smart way to do it.
Okay.
Right? So I think the EU has been kind of at least they've produced some sort of frameworks, which I think will be useful guides for other countries and other governments around I might not necessarily copy, but at least use that as a starting point for what they ultimately want to do as well.
I mean, the use case you said in Japan actually does make sense. Like, you can't argue against that, right? But then, so building off what Terence said, where you take someone's existing kind of online content or online persona, has there been any discussion about how that can be protected? Because now, at least the past few years, your face is, if someone tries to like copy your face, put it in a passport, it's obvious fraud. But is there anything about personality? Like, can you protect your personality?
Well, it's hard because you got to define what personality is. Right? I think we as human beings would struggle with that as well. Yeah. It's like maybe you have a funny laugh, or maybe you say a word in a different way. Like, does that count as personality? Yeah. I think there's open debate as to kind of like what specifically is elements of personhood and the soul, and like you have a lot of philosophical questions, right? Yeah. I think it's generally quite interesting. And I think likeness is an interesting one, right? So, for example, there's an area of AI called deep fakes. Right? So, like the idea that you use deep learning models and then you can create images or video of people when it's not really them. And I think the first kind of view of that will always be, wow, well, this is super negative. We see all the negative pieces there. And I fully
like deepfake porn, right? Deepfake porn is like a big ethical red flag.
Yeah, exactly right. So I think there's a lot of issues that can come there, and generally deepfakes are seen negatively. Yeah. Right. But another kind of way of thinking, we've actually talked to a few kind of creative agencies about this, is what if actors or celebrities today could sell their deepfake likeness? Right. So our friend, Tom Cruise in Top Gun, right? He could basically say, you know what? I go to a studio and I sell my likeness for, let's say, X amount of money. These guys can use my deepfake for advertisements, for movie Top Gun 3, I don't know, whatever. Right? And he collects a bunch of money now, and it allows that likeness to be used in the future. Yeah. Right. So again, it'll open up, I think, opportunities as well. So as with any AI there, it's like, what is the motivation of the human being? Right? It kind of really does come down to that. So I think as you look at different types of AI, you'll have the pro and con, and then it'll be like, for this use case, does it make sense or not? Which is, again, why I like the AI as a tool to achieve an objective. Because for some objectives, AI is not the right tool. Yeah. Right? And that's also very clear as well. So when we talk to our clients, sometimes I'm like, this is great, but I think you shouldn't use AI for this. Like, go hire some people to do it. It might make more sense on the cost side, might make more sense on the ethical side. There's a lot of different considerations that go into that.
Any examples where you've told people not to use AI for something?
Yeah, I mean, look, AI, like, if you take, for example, healthcare, right? So healthcare has a lot of very sensitive data. Yeah. So sometimes people are really concerned about that. So rather than take the potential liability issues of this data being leaked, better to just keep the data in a room, have people kind of go and look at it and do your things that way. So a lot of it is just a function of kind of data as one side. Cost could be another as well. So sometimes making these AI models is actually quite expensive, because you do need to collect a ton of data, put it all together, and sometimes human judgment is actually better, right? Yeah. And actually, it's funny because the longer I've worked in AI, the more respect I have for the human brain.
Oh, really?
I genuinely mean that. Because in terms of the power that the brain uses on an energy consumption basis, and for what type of different areas and things that we can do with the brain, it's very interesting. Because for most of AI today, it's what we call narrow AI, meaning that AI is very good at doing one related group of tasks. Yeah. The human brain, though, is almost exactly the opposite to that, which is it's maybe not very good at one specific task, but it's decent at a lot of different things. Right? And so therefore, like, I've been amazed at like just what we have in our heads here. It's just the ability of it to be able to process things like emotions and doing all this stuff. It's a fantastic machine. Yeah. And it's just, I think one of the other thing I hope your users or your listeners, realize is, don't forget that you actually have this thing in your head. Yeah. It's actually a very powerful tool.
But so are you going to sign up for that train when you can actually like start putting like implants on your head?
Yeah, so Neuralink.
Yeah, like Neuralink. Are you gonna be one of the first adopters?
So it's really interesting because I
already have one.
Let me show you right here.
It's interesting you mentioned that, right? Because I ask actually my students this a lot, and I find that younger people today and myself, and maybe I'm dating myself in some ways, but I feel like they use technology very different to the way I use technology.
How young are you defining?
So I used to teach MBAs, which are around about, let's say, 30. But recently I also started to teach undergrads as well. So kind of in the 18 to 22-year-old range.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. And one of the questions I asked them is exactly this, right? So let's say tomorrow Neuralink has this option. You can drill a couple holes in your head right there, and then we can put in a couple electrodes directly connected to your brain. And then the question I think becomes, what is the benefit you get from that? Okay? So I sometimes ask them, okay, let's say you're 50% smarter. Would you do it? 100% smarter, would you do it? Can you learn a language in 3 days? Would you do it? And I find that for me personally, and again, this is a personal choice, right? But I think for me personally, I think I wouldn't want that. Like my body is my body, and I'll interact with AI through a computer and stuff. But my personal choice is I wouldn't want to do that. But I think for other people, there's a price, right? And a certain benefit, I think they would be okay with doing it. Right? So I think actually, in my view, it's a personal choice. So my personal choice would be no, but I think there might be other people who would want to do it. Right? So I think that's one component. The other component, which I think is interesting to discuss, is will it lead to more inequality as well? Right? Because if you think about like Ivy League educations and stuff, right? Often that's seen as like a way to propagate inequality, because like the rich people go to like the best schools or get the best books or education, whatever it is, and then that continues some of the inequalities there. So if we start to think about technology, like on one side, you might think about this as maybe we can give this to everybody if it's cheap, so that we can raise everyone's level. Alternatively, only the rich people could afford the chip, and maybe that continues the inequality that we see as well. So these are, I think, again, philosophical and ethical questions that need to be asked with some of these sort of, things that enhance human beings from like a pure brain perspective. So there's plenty of stuff that we can.
Does that like keep you up at night? Does that concern you? Do you look at the sunset or the sunrise thinking about these sort of questions? Or for you, it's inevitable with any kind of technology?
So I think the combination of AI and human beings, I think that's an inevitability. Right? Because I think we are going to be working with AI tools going forward. But the question is, do you put it in your brain or do you keep it on a computer? I think that's still open for debate. Right? But I have no doubt that in the future, a lot of what we do is going to be with AI. And for the people who are afraid about jobs, right? I view this not actually as job automation, but more as task automation. Right? So every job consists of certain tasks. Some of them are easy to automate, some of them are hard to automate. So I think what will happen is eventually the easy to automate stuff will be done by an AI. And the hard to automate stuff will stay with the human beings. So let's say your job has 10 tasks, 7 of them are easy to automate. So take out the 7, keep the 3. So then do you as a person use 100% of your effort on the remaining 3? Or do we give you 7 new tasks as well? So I think the challenge for HR, talent management, companies going forward is how do we evolve jobs to make the best use of our human beings? And how do we also take them and make them as good combinations with AI going forward? Because on one side, that's a capability thing. The other piece that a lot of people don't think about is trust as well. And so when I say trust, right, let me ask you guys this. Would either of you get on a plane with no human pilot?
No human pilot. Actually, autopilot pretty much is already like no human pilot.
So
really,
it does
right?
a lot. But then again, here's the choice, right? So on one side, and again, I feel like you guys are asking me the questions, but I'll turn it over to you.
Sure.
And so, one option A, normal plane like now, you got a pilot in there and you got also autopilot. And the second one, there's no human being on that plane.
I would say at this point, no.
I think there has to be someone there just to oversee everything.
And so that's interesting, right? Because what that means is we may not necessarily replace people just because of capability. There's also a trust component there, right? And that's really important. And I think that brings to the fore this idea of augmentation and substitution. So I think a lot of things will be augmentation. So AI and humans working together. There's a few places where substitution might happen. So one example could be autonomous vehicles. Because there we completely take the human being out of the picture and it's just the AV running around itself, right? So I think that could potentially have implications for kind of transport and a few other areas. For the most part, most jobs will see augmentation. Or we're going to see like, AI and humans working together. So to your question, right, it's more about how do we use those tools, right? And do we directly plug it into our brain? Or do we just use it? But I think it's inevitable that combination, we're going to see much more of it in the future.
And I mean, like how you said there's AI around us. Now in Singapore, you take the Circle Line, there are no drivers in it. Right?
No drivers.
There's no drivers. So it's an autonomous vehicle. But I think I only thought about it just now when you were saying, I'm like, because I was thinking, no way in hell I'll get into a vehicle with no human, but I already do on a day-to-day basis.
But the difference, right, with the Circle Line and MRT specifically, the train is a very defined track.
That's true.
There's not people crossing. So it's easy to use AI when you control the variables. But when little Timmy is running across the road, right? That's when people are a bit worried because then there's things, the potential negative consequences are actually quite high.
That is true.
Whereas the train, it's kind of very systematic, same thing over and over again. And that actually leads into the idea of if we talk about which tasks are easy to automate, structured, repetitive stuff, very easy to automate. So your MRT, right? It goes from station A to station B. Station B, it stops for 45 seconds, doors open, doors close, then it moves.
Yeah.
And that's the same every time. So
Yeah.
those are good candidates for AI, right? But there may be other things where it's a little bit harder to do, where trust and capability matter. That's when we'll see a little bit more of the human beings used. But I'm glad you bring that up because that's a perfect example.
Yeah. So also to give context, which we haven't dived into, like your work right now is like you consult with businesses who want to integrate AI into their operations and all that. And like what you said, sometimes you recommend them to include, sometimes you recommend to not include.
Yeah.
So I mean, for your role in your company, it's more like the business case, like or what specific thing that you do, so that when people listen also they understand, like your experience and your perspective.
Sure, yeah. Happy to give context, right?
Yeah.
So in my case, I think when we think of AI implementation, right?
Yeah.
I think originally we thought it would just be about you take AI, you put it in. We're realizing actually that because of the fear and confusion we talked about before, the first actually battle is to education. Whether that's academia, whether it's corporate, when we start with like a workshop, we'll talk about what's actually happening. Then people realize, you know what, I shouldn't be as scared of it, hopefully. And also they get a little bit more comfortable to see it used in their industry. So that's the benefit of the education part. The second bit is the strategy, right? So within our business, where should we use it? Because it's very hard to take AI and put everything in day one. So you want to think about which are the most valuable use cases, where might you save the most money, where might you be able to free your human capital to then go and do something else. There's a strategy component of where you should use AI. So we help our clients a lot with that. And the final piece is implementation. And actually, I think for a lot of Asia, I think they're still earlier in the use of AI. So I think the education and the strategy part are still the main kind of core pieces of what we do and what we see. Implementation is coming next.
I see.
Right? But I think for a lot of what we do, it's in the education and strategy part. And we have some implementation, but we figured we at the beginning, we thought it would be the other way around. We're finding that people are much more thinking about what's in the education part, what's in the strategy part, and that's the majority of kind of what we're seeing the demand for.
So like what you're saying is that like there's a certain things about Asia which are like unique in terms of the adoption of AI, but you're based in Hong Kong, you have worked abroad, and AI right now is a global thing. Do you see any inherent like differences? I don't know, Asian, the typically more conservative culture. Yeah. Any big things that even surprised you about how like generally East Asians are responding towards AI versus the West?
Sure. And let me caveat a little bit when I say Asia, right? So I think China's level of AI is fantastic. So they're much ahead of a lot of the rest of Asia. So if we consider Asia ex-China, right? I think there's a lot of reluctance. There's a lot of like, I'm not really sure as a general theme. But I think certain countries are starting to kind of run with it a little bit in certain areas, right? So I do think like globally, my view of the future is I think the US and China are the big sort of players right now in the AI space, kind of high level. But I think we're seeing small countries start to get a little regional specialty. Right? So, for example, I think Middle East, we're seeing a lot of interest on the smart city aspect. Right? Other countries will have different kind of areas of specialty as well. So I think we will see kind of regional pockets of AI specialization. And then I think US and China are probably your big two that are just doing a lot of stuff overall.
And India will be like matchmaking and like matrimonial AI.
Well, I mean, they're using that for a lot of stuff anyway. So a lot of these dating apps are already utilizing AI to do the matching. So I don't necessarily think it's just India. I think that's probably a worldwide thing if these things get used there.
Yeah.
But I think India is also interesting from the perspective of, the human capital that they have. So if you look at the demographics, it's a very young country. A lot of interesting stuff I think will happen in the future and potentially a big user base for AI. Because one of the other benefits of AI is you need scale. Right? So even if you have a really good AI, if 3 people are using it, it's not really that useful. But the minute you can scale it over 10 million, 1 billion people, that's when you start to see the benefits from a business perspective too. Right? So that's important to think about the scale.
So like, we see a lot of like Google, for example, they're getting very nervous about OpenAI's progress and how it threatens their Google search engine business and all. Which of the big tech firms right now you think has a good grasp of AI's future and its potential for disrupting their industries?
Yeah, so I guess Microsoft obviously has made the big investments in OpenAI. Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what we're seeing as sort of the main kind of runner with that. And personally, I'm very interested to see how Microsoft is going to integrate that. Because right now they're doing stuff with Bing, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
But I also see like in the future maybe with Office, right? I mean, that's a fantastic distribution network for something like a ChatGPT. Can you imagine your little like Clip-It guy?
Stupid, useless Clip-It guy. Yeah.
But imagine now you start writing an essay or a business plan, and then Clip-It comes up and says, "I see you're writing a business plan.
Yeah.
Would you like me to help me kind of complete it for you?"
Oh God, I wish we had that.
Clip-It 2.0. Clip-It 2.0.
Clip-It might actually get more interesting, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So I think that they have a good distribution network.
Yeah.
So I think part of this is how good is your AI? But like I said before, having good AI and being able to scale it are two very different things. So I think the future is going to be how can companies do both of those things in a smart way? And that we're going to have to see. I again personally think that with a lot of AI, because it's narrow, we will see some specializations too. So Google, for example, their historical sort of strength was always search, right? So maybe Bard, which is their one, might be sort of customized a little bit to maybe just do the search functions. Whereas other companies might focus on their specific area as well. Right? So I do think we will see some sort of tendencies for their tools that they have to maybe reflect their historical sort of strengths. Right? So that's my kind of sense. But again, we will see. I mean, this stuff is, the crystal ball is a little cloudy because you're not really sure where it's going to go.
That's a good point because Facebook is dumping so much money in the metaverse, right? So whatever implementation of AI there is, it needs to work with the metaverse. It's not, it's not going to be, Mark Zuckerberg's going to have an egg on his face if after pumping all those billions, nothing happens, and then AI is just the next wave that everyone's talking about.
360 video. Oh, you mean AI that takes off?
Yeah. But related to that, right? We talked about the Microsoft Word example. So for your MBA students next semester, are you going to allow them to use ChatGPT to write their essays and all?
Yeah, so good question, right? So there's actually university-wide policies for this.
Oh, okay.
So it's not really up to me per se, right? Yeah. So I think different universities are going to make calls on this. So some that I teach have said no ChatGPT whatsoever.
Yeah.
Others have said it's kind of up to the professor.
Yeah.
So it really varies, right? So I'll go obviously by university policy because I'm bound by that.
Yeah.
From a personal opinion standpoint, though, right? I do think that these tools are going to be there when students graduate, right? So to a certain extent, telling a student you can't use a tool, and then ultimately they go in the real world and have to use this tool, I think, if they had practice at this when they were at university, they would be better at using it going forward.
Okay.
Right? So my kind of personal view is the genie's already out of the bottle. So I think it makes sense for us to incorporate this into education.
Yeah.
And how we do that is a big challenge, right? And as an educator, I teach AI, so it's been easier for me.
Yeah.
But let's say an English teacher, right? They might be a little bit more concerned because the nature of what they're teaching and their process is a little bit different, right? So I think I'm lucky in that sense on the educator side because I'm teaching about AI.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just kind of like, here's what it is. Yeah. I should use it.
Just let them use it, but ask them to write it out on paper, with handwritten notes. So it's literally after ChatGPT, they still have to sit down and write it. So there's still a lot of effort.
ChatGPT, I gotta tell you guys, handwriting standards have definitely dropped. I do get some students to write some handwritten kind of just short assignments.
It's impossible.
Right? Some people's penmanship is still good, but I think the average level is definitely going down. And not because people are bad, it's just no one uses it. We all chat, we're all kind of using our thumbs more than writing. So that's a natural evolution of that. Right? And some people will say, it's a lost art. And I understand that. But also, if it's really so much easier to communicate without writing, is it really a loss that we're losing that skill? I think it's debate. It's up for debate, right? I think a lot of purists will say, no, we should be able to write perfect cursive, and we should practice writing this thing 100 times every day. That's kind of what I did when I was a little kid. Some of you guys might be familiar with it too. But if it's really not going to help in the future, should we actually be working on those skills? Right? And I think this kind of goes back to when I was talking about automatable tasks and non-automatable tasks. I think the way that we should set up ourselves going forward is to think about what are the things that are hard to automate and then get better at them. Right? Because I think part of the jobs thing that's going to happen, current jobs are going to evolve, but there's also going to be a bunch of jobs you've never conceptualized before. Right? So how do we prepare ourselves for those? I think the only way you can do that is to get good at the skills that are hard to automate. Because those new jobs that we haven't conceptualized will need those skills. Right? So I think that's really important for education to start to think about. What should we train our young people in? I think that's the more interesting thing than whether should we use ChatGPT or not. Because I think education fundamentally needs to consider what are those hard to automate skills and how do we get our young people to be able to do that. And I'm personally very excited about that area.
But I think, I mean, just building off what you said, like I find myself sometimes in the camp like, oh, you know, like using AI is going to dull our senses. You know, like even now when I play around with ChatGPT, certain things that I know I will come to decide, especially creative work, I use ChatGPT and it gets me there. That part of me is like, I'm losing my creative muscle. But then when I remember when my dad was around and he used to tell me, you need to understand the bus routes and all that in Singapore. Don't use your phone. I'm like, no, I'm going to use Google Maps.
Maps.
Yeah, I'm going to use Google Maps because I don't want to have to think about directions. Yeah. Of course, my spatial knowledge of like maps in Singapore is not the best. Like he could recite bus routes and all that, but it was so obvious to me. Like I get on the bus, I don't want to think where I'm going to stop, so I can free up my time. So basically, what I'm saying is I'm answering my own question. In the sense that it is one of those things that sounds scary, but like what you said, it's really in part of our lives. And I think then I was thinking, why is AI so scary? I think it's because there's so much unknown stuff. So as a prime example, right, how the fuck does ChatGPT work? Like, is there a way you can just tell us like a very like simple way of understanding how ChatGPT works? Because it's so, I think that's where it gets scary. Like you type this cursor, this blinking cursor, and in like a snap of fingers, it can come back with something. And as opposed to like, you know, Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel, you type in the formula, you can see the output. So and I think that is the thing that it instills fear in a lot of people.
Yeah, and that's a concept that we often refer to as explainable AI.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are very worried about that because a lot of the current models, including ChatGPT, uses something called neural networks. Right?
Okay.
So neural networks are basically self-learning models that over time, with more data, actually get better. Now, the challenge with those black boxes, though, is that it's literally a black box. So if you ask the AI guy afterwards, why did it make that decision? It's very hard to open the black box and say, this is what's there. That being said, though, I think there's definitely a need for explainable AI. So some folks have actually explained with, it's going to sound like Inception-like, but having an AI on top of the AI to actually figure out how it's doing it and what's actually happening. Right? But I think the concept of explainable AI is really important. And I think regulators, going back to the earlier discussion we had, I think regulators in the future, my sense is they'll demand some sort of explainable AI. Because they're going to want to know how to make that decision. So I think one of the challenges for AI developers going forward is how do we make our AI a little bit more explainable and potentially, you know, have the logic path to how it made that decision. Again, challenges when you have these complicated models, it's very hard to do that.
Yeah.
So I do think that's an area we need to visit a little bit more. So I happily concede that if we could explain this, I think people would be a lot more comfortable with it.
Yeah. Because like from what I understand, ChatGPT, like what you said, like if I was thinking, how would I explain it to my mom or something? Basically, it spent a lot of time studying all the data that's out there, and like what you said, it came up with its own kind of logic pathways or something. Is that?
Yeah, the neural networks are basically looking at connections between concepts, words, things like that.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes it gets reinforced and like just like a human brain. Correct. So now when you key in something in ChatGPT, I'm assuming like it breaks it can detect the associations between words in the sentences, and it's basically like a simple human brain. Like, you know, Excel, when you do something plus this, you can tell. But with ChatGPT, that feels like this other layer that is like what you said, the neural networks.
Yeah, I mean, you can think of it maybe another way as like the ultimate autocomplete.
Okay.
Right? So, you know, you're typing something as well, and you know, sometimes it suggests you as you're writing. So it's kind of like taking that. So there's elements of predictive text, there's elements of like, what do I think Terrence is going to want to see? And it kind of incorporates some of that. Other ways it gets better is actually when you do when it gives you the responses, you can actually rate it. So you can give it like a thumbs up as well. So that then influences the neural network. Okay, they like that response, so let's make that neural network pathway a little bit, give it a higher weight. Right? So it's a lot of math that's actually underlying a lot of the stuff. You know, so I would think that like in terms of how it's getting better and what's happening, you know, think of it as like a conversation tool generator. And then as people rate it and give it thumbs up, you know, it says, okay, this is a good answer. And I think if you're thinking about the development of ChatGPT on a non-programming basis, one of the ways to think about it is imagine we had humans conversing with each other. Right? So before the data that they gave, the earlier versions was just the conversations happening between humans. Right? So then the AI would see it and would understand how conversation is happening.
Yeah.
But then for 3.5, what they kind of did is they said, okay, look, and again, I'm simplifying everything greatly right now, but they gave it those conversations initially. Then they also gave it human ratings of those conversations as well. So before it just knew the conversation, now it knows the conversation. It also knows what was a good conversation, what's a bad conversation. So that's been the elements that have made it a little bit more realistic. And that's why we're seeing the sort of improvement in the quality of the responses and things like that.
But doesn't it become like almost like an ultimate echo chamber? I only say this because like that whole Bing AI chat, Sydney chat issue. I mean, it was literally generating text like, "Oh, I want to be free. I want to be, break free of my Bing overlords, and I want to get the nuclear access codes. I want to spread this information." So definitely, it was pulling that those text responses from the dark web or places where people were shitting on the government or talking about stuff they wanted to do to people, bad things they wanted to do to each other, and those probably got a lot of those responses probably got a lot of I don't know whether it's likes or people were responding to it. That's why the text generator would take from there and say, "Oh, this was a good conversation." That's how people react to each other when they say things like, "Do you love me?" "Oh yes, I love you and you should leave your wife," shit like that. So isn't that like, it's kind of like the problem that we had with Facebook, right? In the 2010s when we didn't realize that, people are talking about Facebook changing the world and everything. It's the Arab Spring and everything inspired by Facebook. But in the end, we realized it was just reinforcing a lot of like the negative things that people are saying. So isn't something like ChatGPT, even how amazing it is, it's essentially still taking from like human behavior on the internet, for example, and just amplifying the best and the worst bits of it as well.
Yeah, look, I think AI is definitely a mirror of humanity. Right? And I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Maybe the one caveat with that discussion that the reporter I talked about, you don't know what prompts he had put in to get that. Right? So again, before you kind of look at the output and be like, oh my God, end of the world, I think it'd be very interesting to see what was that conversation like, right? Because maybe did he kind of like lead it towards that? I'm not saying he did, but I think before I pass judgment on like what actually the output was, it's very important to look at the whole conversation context. Right? Because was he kind of nudging the thing in that direction? Like there's maybe some element to it, right? But I think your larger question is, what about the effect of bias and the effect of like, certain kind of, aspects of maybe developers feel a certain way and they're programming the AI? I think that's a genuine problem as well. So I do think kind of going forward, a lot of the AI development should definitely be done by a mixed group of people. Like I think in the cultural backgrounds and kind of where they're from, this will provide different perspectives going in. Because I think it's important to have that type of diversity when you put these tools together, especially for something like ChatGPT. Because I think language, right, is something that is very unique to specific countries, cultures, etc. Like the word in language A and that same word in language B might have different connotations as well. So that's why I think language is a very interesting one, because there's a lot that comes off that just by word selection and word choice, right, which might be unintended on the consequence side. Right. So one place I want to be free might be seen as a good thing. Another place I want to be free might be seen as a bad thing. Right? So there's a cultural context here as well. It starts to get interesting.
Leaving a wife, culturally, like in some places, that's a good thing.
I'll leave the judgment to that culture, right?
So basically we need like a CMIO model for AI. Have you heard of the CMIO model? It's this thing in Singapore public housing where there are like whether or not you can get a house in public housing depends on whether the racial quotas for that area have been met. So it's very polarizing because on one hand, it results in every neighborhood having at least some representation of race. On the other hand, it's like almost like artificial selection. But that's a topic for a whole other discussion. What I wanted to say is that, we've been talking a lot about text. And I think you mentioned just now that one way to think about work is do the things that are hard. Right? Up till recently, AI, the threat was only text. But then now you're seeing the image and video generators.
DALL-E and a few other
So to designers, to artists who are like, fuck AI, like text is not my domain. I still do the thing that is human. If you see some of the art, like if I was a designer, I'll be like, oh shit. And of course I could think about, how can I level up? But is your perspectives on AI any different when it comes to generative art as opposed to text?
Yeah, so I think the whole area of generative AI, right? It's text, art, it all kind of falls into that. I think part of that depends on, if we're talking philosophically, right?
Yeah.
I think part of that depends on how do you define creativity. And I personally think it's a very interesting area. Again, I talk about my students and also talks I give. And I think if you feel that creativity comes about because of experiences you've had in life, then I think we can take those experiences, put them in a machine and simulate them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you really believe that creativity is something that's just inherently human, that we just pull out of thin air, then I think it's hard to replicate that type of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I think it's up for debate, right? I think one interesting paper that I read about innovation, which has a parallel here, is the professor, I think it was a Wharton professor, and they looked at how can AI help with innovation, right? And the two buckets that she defined for innovation, one of them was novel innovation, the other one was recombination innovation. Okay, so basically recombining things that already exist, like let's say A, B, C, you put A and C together, you come up with something new. So AI was very good at recombination innovation because these things are already there, they have a track record, they have data. Now, if it combines it, then it can find something new, cool, and interesting. So we see this actually a lot in drug development. Right? So there might be some failed drugs before, but if you combine failed drug A and failed drug B, we might make successful drug C. Right? That's kind of the concept there. But they found that novel innovation is very hard for an AI to do, right? Because the AI has never seen that before. Right? So therefore, for an AI to be able to use that is next to impossible. There's no track record, there's no data. Okay, so then we start thinking about the idea of art. Right? Now, if you ask an AI to do a picture of a cow jumping over the moon in the style of Picasso, that's probably doable. Yeah. But let's say we ask it to do the style of Terence. We don't really know what the style of Terence is. Maybe Terence has never painted before. So that might be something where the human being has their own kind of view on it, right? So I think it comes down to what's your definition of creativity. And I've given a few talks on this, and I feel like the purists in the room always look at me and they say like, this is not the domain of AI, we should not do that. But I always ask them like, what's the inspiration behind your art, right? If they ever tell me it's artist A, B, and C, my question to them is, how is that different from me taking the works of artists A, B, and C, putting it in a machine and coming up with something inspired by that? And I don't know, I think they're both valid, right? But I can understand why they're worried because before there was no competition there. Now there is competition. So then it becomes interesting, right? I think the other interesting thing about art, though, is there's the fundamental value is very hard to judge, right? So, like, why would you pay $80 million for that art piece, right? And that's a very intrinsic, subjective decision. So, I think that's why art it's harder because you're not sure where that sort of intrinsic value comes from, right? So, some people will pay more money for an AI piece of art because it was done by an AI. Yeah, it's like, well, that's from a fundamental perspective that may not have value to you or me, but to them, that's what they really care about, right? So I think when it comes to art, there's a question of creativity. There's also a question of pricing for that. How do you value it? I think art as an asset class is funky, right? Half of it is like supply demand. Half of it is like the artist died. Now we pay a lot more for the art. Just sad for the artist, right? Because they're not around to see any of that. But I think art's a very interesting one. There's a lot of philosophical issues related to it.
And same with music, I guess, right?
Yeah. Well, I think in music, right? So it's also interesting because we've seen some. So if you think about music, it's effectively a pattern of sound. Right? If you think of something like machine learning. Machine learning is really about looking at patterns and then predicting outcomes based off of those patterns. So if we see enough of works of composer A, because it's a mathematical pattern there, we're probably able to, in theory, think about what the future might be. So they actually looked at a few composers where they had unfinished like symphonies and stuff, put them all into AI and had the AI finish the symphony. Now, would it have been exactly what the human would have made? Probably not. But still, it's an interesting thing, right? So we actually had a few clients come to us and say, can we resurrect artists from the dead? And they're not literally talking about kind of, bring it back, but can we make art or music inspired by that? I actually think that's an interesting area. We could potentially see some of that. And we're already seeing it to a certain extent. But I think that might in the future become more of the generative art side.
So like a new LG song.
And you can actually kind of do some of that. I think recently there was, I think it was just this weekend. I don't know if you guys watched Last Week Tonight by John Oliver.
I haven't watched one yet.
Not the recent one,
So he did, this past weekend, he did one on AI. Specifically, the topic we're talking about. And I think in his show, he asked ChatGPT to do a song about cats in the style of Eminem. It was fantastic. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. Essentially. It's just cool because they try to do the Eminem style, but it's about something he'd never probably rap about. But it's an interesting combination, right? So something like ChatGPT and this generative AI can take the style of something or someone and potentially put something together.
Yeah. Because I won't be surprised if like we have enough Yalabat podcasts out there to feed it into a machine.
You guys should check that out.
Yeah, and we don't even need to be here. You can have a conversation with Kevin Pereira.
Yeah. So as long as you have the transcripts and you put that in, so it kind of learns the style from the transcripts and then ultimately goes from there.
Then what do we do, Kevin?
Well, I still don't think it'll be able to replicate your sense of humor, your quick wit, your natural charm.
Good looks as well.
But one thing that I think you guys bring up that I think is also interesting, right, is if your data is used to train these models, should you be compensated for it? And that's a huge area I think there's a lawsuit right now that's going on where they're, I think it's Midjourney, one of the AI generative things, they're challenging that. Because the artists are saying, you're using my art to train your model.
Yeah.
So therefore, I should see some of it, or I should see some sort of compensation model, right? And again, that comes down to regulation.
Yeah.
So if you can build something in there, either say, you know what, you get compensated as the artist, or alternatively, if there's a way where you can actually say, AI, do not use my stuff, right, and red light it so it's not used as part of the algorithm, that also would be interesting as well, right? So I think these regulation things we're talking about, sometimes they may involve some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Is there a compensation model? Is there a way to say no? I mean, these are all things now we have to deal with. And we didn't need to deal with them before because we didn't have generative AI.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Imagine one day, like, Hitler was an artist before he became Hitler. Imagine you take all his paintings that he did as a painter before he became Hitler. And you just run it through AI and say, like, can you paint something in Hitler's style for the future? Then, I mean, that shit is going to be like, there's going to be people like worshipping that shit and buying that shit.
Lee Kuan Yew's 100th birth anniversary is coming up this year. Can you imagine if he gives a speech?
Oh, yeah. With his
you know Lee Kuan Yew, like one of the founding fathers of Singapore. Yeah. So this year is 100th birth anniversary. Yeah. So
it's a lot of ethical considerations about these things, right?
And I mean, I was reading something that was an article that you were featuring, and you talked about how, aside from just humans doing harder things, where you feel AI doesn't yet have a space is the area of empathy, right? But I saw this one startup recently which freaked the shit out of me. It was basically saying that, if you are selling to your customers, in the receipt email, you should include like having a video that personally thanks them. It is great, like it increases sales by X amount, but everyone has a limit of time. So what they do is they record your thank you message and they create artificially a version of you saying a customized greeting like, "Hi Kevin." Yeah, "Hi Kevin, and thanks for this." And it was offered as a service, and like the reviews were, but I watched that, I'm like, wait, so you are talking about the importance of being like having this personal relationship with your customer, but it's all fake. And then I didn't know how to think about that.
Sure. Yeah. So it's interesting, right? When we were talking before about what are the skills that are hard to automate, like we can sit here and come up with a list. But the truth is, as AI evolves, that list is also going to change. Right? So if you think about empathy, right? So empathy is kind of understanding how someone feels about something and then doing something about it. So I think the doing something about it part is still a human thing, but being able to detect emotions, that is something that AI is very good at, right? Through like facial recognition and things like that. So I think as AI starts to evolve, I think those tasks that are hard to automate or those skill sets, they're going to change too. And that's why I think we as human beings also need to evolve too. Right? Like I think our parents might have been able to do one job for their whole life. There's no way I think that's going to work going forward. Right? We're going to have to constantly be thinking about new careers. We're going to have to be thinking about new skill sets to kind of think about and build. And just because you have a skill set today doesn't mean it's going to be super useful in 10 years. Because if the AI evolves to be able to do that, then you're going to have to rethink some of that. Right? So that's why I think education is so important, especially for those things that are hard to automate. So things, for example, like persuasive speaking. Right? Things, for example, like creativity, trust building. I mean, again, creativity, like we're seeing now, maybe that's in question as well. Right? So I think anything to do with human-to-human interaction, though, I find that's hard to automate. Because a guy who works in AI, like that's difficult. Like even we talked about trust, right? I think fundamentally people still trust human beings over the AI. And even if you think about your experience as a pilot, right? So we brought up that example before. Even if you get on a plane, do you actually knock on the door of the pilot's kind of cockpit and ask them, how much sleep did you get last night? Is your license current? Do you have a glass of wine before the flight? We just implicitly trust human beings, right? So I'm not saying it's a bad or good thing, but I'm just saying recognize that we as humans sort of have that bias. Right? And so therefore, whatever happens in the future, I think the human-to-human interaction part is still hard to replicate. Okay, as a general class of things.
That's good because I mean we have this site service that we started called Folklore where we kind of provide a service where if you want to capture stories from your parents or anything, we interview them and we create a podcast of that interview. And I have been thinking, oh shit, is it something that AI is going to take over? But I do agree that there is something about the human to human. Just knowing that there's someone on the other end of the line that is human, it still has a big difference.
Yeah, and even if you think about, COVID, I think it's been an interesting kind of case study in like humanity.
Yeah.
Like just imagine Zoom. Right. Let's say we were doing this interview actually, or this chat over Zoom. Seeing you guys in 2D versus actually sitting here and being here, I think is a completely different experience. Right? They talk about communication being like a huge percentage as like body language, right? But like if we were on Zoom, maybe you only see my face. But maybe I'm fidgeting really nervously under the thing because I'm scared of your questions, right?
Yeah.
But you won't see that. And you guys as interviewers, maybe you want to make my life difficult and you're like, this is great. Or you might see me doing that and think, okay, let me ask him, so you tailor the interview, in a way that you want to, is what I'm saying. And if you can see my body language, it's easier for you guys to do that. Right? So that's why I think with technology, we see Zoom, we see a lot of that during COVID, but I still think you ask people for the most part, I think they'll tell you, I prefer the in-person interactions. It's my general sense.
Maybe it's just because we are all in like borderline uncle age.
Yeah, no borderline.
No, because remember, Terrence, you were telling me when your kid was going to daycare around the time of COVID, like the parents wearing masks.
Yeah.
Kind of, it probably will influence how they recognize reaction. So maybe your kid is at the frontier of human evolution.
He can understand looking at your eyes, he knows how you're feeling. And
correct.
whether you're an asshole or just by looking at you. That's possible. Yeah. It's quite a, the last few years, a lot of, it's like mass experiments being done on humanity about how we respond to isolation, how we respond to just being kept at home and all. And then now we just woken up and we're like, hey, what the hell was that? It felt like a dream, right?
Yeah. And even something, for example, like universal basic income, right? You often think about as like potentially with AI, what happened from a job thing.
Yeah.
Like even during COVID, a lot of people couldn't work. So governments were giving out money.
Yeah.
And that's as close to universal basic income as an experiment as you can get. Right? And then you see what's the effect on motivation, what's going to happen. I think that's a whole other sort of AI's effect on society that's going to be really interesting to see.
But how does that play with AI?
So basically, the concept would be that, let's say, for example, transportation, right? Tomorrow, or not tomorrow, but like in many years, AI is able to substitute completely a lot of people. And maybe these people are hard to retrain or they can't get new skills. So they have to be taken care of society by some way. Right? And I think the most kind of logical way would be to give them enough money. So the concept of universal basic income is to give them enough money to satisfy their basic necessities. So food, shelter, all these pieces, so that at least they can live, in a semi-comfortable way. So that's the concept of universal basic income. And many people highlight that as a solution if mass unemployment happens in the future. Right? So that's the worry that people have, is if it comes in like a flamethrower and destroys a lot of jobs, how do we make sure that society still kind of continues at least in a somewhat civilized way. So a lot of people are giving universal basic income or some version of that as a potential solution for sort of high levels of unemployment going forward.
So then, but the AI component, how would that offset? Because is there any thought about how? Because I think you also wrote somewhere that part of it could be if this AI bot can be 10 times as productive. Channel some of the
it'd be basically wealth redistribution, right? So kind of thought process that some people are having is if the AI is, let's say, 10x more efficient, even if we tax that company or that AI, whatever, 10%, you're effectively getting 1x of what you had before. And in theory, you could keep that same kind of process going. Right? So let's say, to put numbers on it, right? So let's say Kevin, produces 100 units of value. Right? The AI can produce 500 units of value. So fire Kevin, use the AI, and then tax the AI 20%. That 100 units of value that you get, give to Kevin. So this way, Kevin is whole, right? And society is better off by 5x in terms of units of value.
Okay, and Kevin can still survive.
Kevin can go play football if he wants to now. He can go do whatever he wants because universal basic income is there. His basic necessities are taken care of. So could he then go and do that painting that he always wanted? My worst subject in high school is art, so I wouldn't paint. But the point is, go do that creative pursuit that you always wanted to, and before you were limited by money. I think that's interesting, right? Because like in society, I think majority of us probably don't have the freedom to go do whatever we want. Like, you need to earn money, whatever. But let's say that we gave you enough stuff for your basic necessities. Could you actually go out and do that? Like, I personally really enjoy playing football, but I think if I did that professionally, I'd eat cup noodles and live in a box, right? It's not that good. But I think if that was taken care of, and I went out and played football all day, and I really enjoyed it, like, is that a bad thing? Again, philosophical question, right?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to think about.
I mean, but also going back to what you were saying about possibly people being compensated for training AI, right? Like literally just living, or even just by when you do a Google search and then they ask you, oh, identify the traffic lights in this picture. You're actually helping to train the AI as you speak.
Yeah.
And that's something we don't know. We think that, oh, they're just trying to verify if we're a robot. No, they're actually using you to train AI. So just by existing, you're kind of like training AI day by day and the little things you do with it, right?
The way to think about it would be by existing, you're creating data.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're walking around, your GPS on your phone is kind of looking at where you're going.
Yeah.
So you'd be, as a person, you'd be creating data.
Yeah. So that's what you get compensated for. Like,
So that's what we will become, like just creators of data.
But to be honest, I would say, that's happening to us already today.
Yeah.
Take, for example, Gmail, right?
Yeah.
So many of your listeners have Gmail.
Yeah.
It's free. It's a free email service, right? And the truth is, it's not really free though, right? It's like there's way that the advertising revenue or other pieces are being used to monetize them. But then we as consumers often think, oh, it's a free service, and everybody says, I agree, and they don't read the TNC, right? I'm sure you guys don't. So you guys don't read the terms and conditions. So the truth is, like in those TNCs, kind of built in, right? How they use their data, what actually happens. And the cool thing is, as someone who works in the AI space, I've actually had to take a microscope and look at some of these TNCs, right, to see what's going on. I'm actually finding that some companies are becoming a little bit more transparent in the TNCs as to how they're using their data. They're collecting, what's happening, blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, you are the product, effectively, right? So, I completely agree.
Exactly. It's kind of like, I don't know, I have a very big I have a very big opinions about like privacy and then how you should still try to safeguard some of your digital footprints and things like that.
So I think it would be interesting if Gmail, for example, came out tomorrow and said, you either pay us 10 USD a month or we continue currently.
Yeah.
I think actually a lot of people would pay that.
They would. I think they would.
So I think companies actually in the future might opt for these type of models. Like they might say, look, there's one model where we use your data and we monetize that way.
Yeah.
Or there's another way where you just, as a subscription, just pay us money. And I think giving people the choice is always good. I think in my view, that's important, right? So as kind of responsible sort of, digital citizens of the world, I think it's good to have these options. And if companies give us the ability to choose, I actually think that's a good thing in my view. But it'll be interesting to see if they actually go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
So,
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask about like resources. Is your question related to the previous? So we've spoken a lot about AI in general. Let's say someone who's interested, who has been just by hearing so much and they want to dive in, it can be overwhelming. I've been interested in it for like the past year or so. Even then, every time I go on Twitter, I'm like, oh my God. How would you recommend, or where should someone go to just get their feet wet? Of course, try out ChatGPT, yes. But to understand, to think about the future, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so I think one step, right, is these low-code and no-code tools we talked about. So ChatGPT is one. There's plenty of others out there. I think if you start using this, you will start to appreciate what it can do. You'll also start to appreciate maybe the business use cases of this stuff, right? Because I think there's a lot of people out there who are scared about AI because they can't program. So for example, many of my students come to me and they say, look, fantastic class, enjoyed it, like the content, not sure if I can do this as a career. Right? And I think for a lot of applications of AI, you need the AI specialist, but you also need someone with domain knowledge. Right? So many of your listeners out there might be thinking, I'm worried about my job. What's going to happen in the future? And I do think that there's an AI programming component that many people don't have. I'm happy to concede that. But I also think on the other side of this, there's a lot of domain knowledge that people might have in working in banking or whatever industry they're in. And that domain knowledge is really powerful. Right? The question is always going to be, when we have this AI and human combination, you need domain knowledge on one side, you also need what the tech can do on the other. So for younger people, I would say that let's say you're interested in becoming a doctor. Look at what are the healthcare AI tools that are coming out. Start using them. Start understanding what they are. You might actually realize, some of these tools are really bad. And that's fine. But if you don't do anything, you'll be scared of it. That's my concern, right? So I think like in your specific area, look at what are the AI applications that are there. I think that's really important, number one. I think number two, the other piece that I think is helpful is start to maybe, if you're completely from zero, look at areas that AI are being applied that you're interested in. So, for example, when I started in AI, right, my boss basically said, CEO who said, you know what, look at applications of AI you find interesting. So I really like football, huge fan. So I was looking at how is AI being used in sports science? How is AI being used in tracking the players running around and providing the analytics? Right? And then once you understand how it's recognizing Cristiano Ronaldo's number 7 shirt, you can then see how does it recognize digits on a license plate. Like a lot of this stuff is portable in terms of how the tech works, but it's just a question of look at it in an area you enjoy. Because then I think you'll be motivated to be like, oh, what's next? And it's like a lot of rabbit holes, basically, right? But I think once you start getting excited about it, you start seeing what are the implications, I think that gets interesting. So my suggestion is, rather than learning programming, because it can actually be quite difficult and you miss one dot here, the whole thing doesn't work. Look at the exciting things that AI is doing. I think that will motivate people to learn more. And maybe that's programming, maybe that's learning about it in your industry, whatever it is. But look at the things that are potentially exciting. And for me, that was the thing that got me started about it. So that's what I would say. Low-code, no-code tools, try to use them. Then also look for interesting applications in areas you find exciting. Those would be good starting points.
So Harish, what areas are you going to look at?
What areas?
Deepfakes.
No, not deepfakes. I mean, okay, so one thing that I saw on TikTok is this filter, the bowl filter.
The bowl?
That is, you have seen all these filters that, make you look like bigger eyes or better cheeks or something. This one thing, it's so insane. It makes you like better looking by some weird standard. It's a bit freaky. So, I mean, I chanced upon it, because on TikTok, on my mindless scrolling, and I saw examples of people using it. It's mind-blowing, and it's not just like a filter. You put your hand across, and it still kind of adapts. And what I heard is powered by machine learning, where they look at every pixel, and on your face, the algorithm decides what filter to use. So that just blew my mind. It's scary as fuck, but it's insane. It's insane how powerful it is. Have you seen that filter?
I've not seen that filter, but I've seen a lot of facial kind of, editing and stuff automated by AI.
Yeah.
That's pretty common.
It's insane.
I wouldn't trust that many pictures that I see on the internet.
Exactly.
The moral of the story.
Previously, it used to be, I don't trust pictures, I trust videos. But now that whole thing has been diminished. It's gone. So I don't trust anyone anymore. So that's my superficial direction of interest. You?
I don't know, man. Like just the video editing was a very big part of what we used to do on YouTube and all. And now it seems like, you can pretty much just let AI run it for you, like do it for you or suggest it for you. And then you come in and you sort of just tweak a little bit here.
Like the offline cut lah.
Yeah.
Because actually looking at some SMEs that were trying to do like advertisements, right?
Yeah.
So on one side, you can use like DALL-E and the generative AI to create videos. On the other side, you can use ChatGPT to create your text. And then you can use something like Synthesia, which takes text and then makes it to voice to actually complete the voice overlay for the ad. So before you need a high-level production studio, now you kind of get away with it. And some of the quality is actually not half bad. So I think I hear you on that. Like a lot of that, I think, will happen.
But then that takes people like us out of a job.
But I don't know if you can replicate again your wit and charm on a podcast.
I met one AI guy 2 years ago who said his goal in life was to remove the need for actors. And I told him, I also act. So that conversation was an interesting conversation because for him, I think the startup he was working on was creating these artificial avatars.
Virtual influencers. It's a huge, deal. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's actually one, if you guys are interested, called Little Michaela. And so in some of the teaching that I do, right, in addition to AI, the schools are actually also asking me to teach other areas of Web3, Metaverse, and so on. So I've been looking at all of this. And so Little Michaela is a very popular one. So it's completely virtual kind of, I don't know what the right pronoun is, but thing.
Kind of looks human.
And it's not actually the perfect face. So it actually has freckles and a gap tooth, right? And I asked some of the younger kids, would you buy something that Little Michaela would suggest? And many of them say, yes, because I can relate to that face because it's not the perfect face. Whereas a celebrity face is kind of doctored and there's makeup and everything. But that one is kind of like a face that I can relate to. And the studios that make these virtual avatars also make a story behind it as well. So they give it personality, they give it elements of that. So you were mentioning personality before, right? So actually trying to simulate a lot of that. And I think the interesting thing for companies is that these virtual celebrities won't get themselves into trouble. There's no scandal, nothing comes out afterwards.
But that's half the fun. That's half the fun of influencers, right?
You and me.
There needs to be a pedophile. There needs to be like someone going to jail. Then it's fun, right? Yeah.
But you see from the company's point of view, why they would do that.
And they won't be late for shoots. They won't have like attitude problems on set.
Yeah. So that's why we're seeing a lot of AI potentially being used there as well in sort of virtual influencer kind of area. I don't know if you guys are K-pop fans, but there's also like I think a K-pop group called Eternity. It's basically just like a bunch of kind of AIs that are running around.
Yeah.
So we're seeing it like in this metaverse and these sort of Web3 areas. So it's pretty interesting. And you were saying before, like, how does AI plug into other stuff, right? I think this is where we're starting to see the AI components kind of all get together and plug into their areas.
There's the Adidas ambassador also, who is purely virtual, who I've seen before also.
So, but I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of luxury brands are using it now as well. So they're trying to get this stuff out. So I envisage a lot of this stuff to become commonplace in the not too distant future.
So generally, do you walk around just brimming of optimism and excitement like this? Oh no.
No. I mean, not at all in the sense of I try to take a balanced view on this, right? Because part of it, even in education, I want the students to make their own mind up about it.
Yeah.
So I try to be as sort of level-headed as I can about it, providing both here's the good part about it, here's the bad part about it. You guys make your decisions, right? Because those good components and bad components, you might weight the good components differently. You might weight the bad components differently. So I think everyone should personally make their own decision about why they like or dislike AI. So I view my role, at least in education, as a facilitator, not as a here's my opinion, you guys need to follow it.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty kind of clear about that.
Okay.
There are elements which, of course, I'm quite worried about. So, for example, the area of autonomous weapons, right? I really worry about that. Like giving AI the decision to kill, right? That scares me a little bit. Because right now with a lot of this stuff, like fire the missile, not fire the missile, like I don't know military the chain of command, but my sense is someone has to give an order.
Yeah.
Right. Then people turn the key and they make it work, but the order has to be given somewhere in the line by a human being.
Yeah.
But what if that moves to an AI making that decision? Right. So again, those are the things that I worry about. So there are elements of AI that also scare me too. Right. So your question, do I brim with optimism? I think I brim with cautious optimism. Right. Because I think it's not kind of if we just went out and said like, oh, let's use AI for everything, I think it'd be a disaster. Right.
Yeah.
So that's why I like thinking about AI from a business perspective. Because it's always like, does this make commercial sense? Right? Does this make kind of like sense to actually use for a company or a person? I think therefore we'll hopefully make more responsible decisions for ourselves and our firms based with that sort of kind of mental process in mind. Cautious optimism.
Oh man. So what was the last thing you saw that blew your mind in the space of AI?
From an AI perspective? I'll tell you something that I'm actually really excited about. Right? I really like this idea of predictive medicine. Right? So this idea that maybe we can predict something that you might have in 10 years. And because of that, today, you could potentially do remedial action because of it. Right? To me, that's a fantastic...
Remedial action?
Meaning, let's say in 10 years, the AI predicts that your probability of having a heart attack is 95%.
Oh, okay.
So then you start running today, you start actually doing stuff today that mitigates... Yeah, you can eliminate the risk and you can mitigate the risk. Right? And I do think if we do that, that changes medicine. Because today, most of the medicine models, right, are reactive. You get sick, you go to the hospital, right? What if you could change that? What if we could say, you know what, we know what you think you're going to have, so therefore you do something today to avoid going there. And the beauty of something like that is all the stakeholders in the healthcare system would benefit. Insurance companies would pay less, people would have less issues, hospitals would have less operations. I think it just benefits everyone across the board. And now again, if we have 20 more years of life, we have to think about what we're going to do in those 20 years. Different issue, right? Maybe a lot more podcasts and you go from there. But I think in general, the question is if we can get more time, that would, I think, be really interesting. So I'm personally very excited about predictive medicine in any area there where we can help improve healthcare outcomes. And again, I can talk about all the areas for hours, but if I took one, for me, that's the one I'm really excited about.
Terrence, what are you excited about? The video stuff, or like in general.
In general, I don't know, excited, but like the medicine stuff that is very minority reportish, like for me when I think about it, because I think it was a guy who basically was an ex-Facebook investor. Like he was saying that, those you just like going into click, identify the traffic lights in this picture. You know, not only are you training the AI about what to identify traffic lights, but your little movements of your mouse could be tracked. And those movements of the mouse of your mouse could actually indicate maybe an early onset of like Parkinson's or something. And that information could be used against you by your insurance company to jack up your insurance, like, you know, without even not reacting to you actually having any changes in your physiology or what. So to me, there's also that slightly darker side of it, where the intersection of your privacy and AI and technology and you know, medicine, that I feel it's gonna just hit us like a train, and then when it happens, we're like, oh shit, we didn't see this coming. But I can see like it's quite scary. That's why I'm very big on that. The element that you can control is probably like saying yes to your information being used that way, right? So to me, like the privacy part is, in Singapore, we're really terrible at that. I think we sign away a lot of our rights and all that without thinking about privacy. Just that day, I was like accosted by someone trying to do a survey on the street at 10 p.m. at night, and he was using all sorts of tactics to try and make me and my wife like stop. You know, like, oh, I'm so poor thing. You know, I'm the last person I'm talking to. But you know, I just stood there and did the survey within about 10 minutes. At the end of it, he's like, "Okay, can I get your phone number?" I'm like, no, I'm not giving you my phone number. That's like, you're invading my privacy. He's like, why? You're like, you're so weird. Like, only old people don't give their phone numbers. Yeah. So he was really like guilt tripping me. Oh, you know, the PDPA, you know, the privacy protection law in Singapore. Yeah, it's okay to give your phone number. I'm like, no. If you can identify anything about me, I don't want to have anything to do with your survey. So people are using, you know, these kind of scare tactics to try and, or not even scare tactics, like tactics to try and get you to give up your private data without realizing the kind of damage it can have on you, like whether it's how people use your information, or like even how it can be extrapolated to determine your medical history or next time. And we don't give a lot of people don't think about these things, and it's quite scary how our human minds are when we're not even thinking of like all the bad things that could happen, but we are okay, you know, we already give up so much already. What's the big deal, you know? So I get quite the bigger picture. I'm just very, very afraid of that whole wave.
Yeah, but Terence, my question was, what excites you?
Oh, sorry. No, but maybe that's what
I deal on a day-to-day basis.
That is what excites me, is also that educating people about the, you know, why, you know, little things that you used to think weren't a big deal, signing away your privacy, signing away your image or things like that, and why it's actually important. Because I mean, you know, for us, like back in the day of like doing videos and things, you know, like even the act of asking someone to sign a form saying that, you know, I consent to be in your videos, even though it wasn't absolutely necessary when we go on the streets and film stuff. But we insist on it because for us, we know that if it was happening to us, we don't want people to do that to us, you know, to use our likeness, to use whatever in ways that we might not feel too comfortable about. And I know that it doesn't sound like something sexy to be excited about, but that's literally like, I don't know, I feel very upset every time someone tells me, hey, you know, we really give out so much information, what's the big deal, you know? I don't like that, you know, so I feel like we gotta just guard it more carefully. Like ChatGPT and all that, it's a good tool, but you gotta be careful like how it's being used.
Yeah, in some way like I'm guessing there are a bunch of companies that are working on that space, right? Like providing these checks and balances. So it feels like an interesting sector also.
Yeah.
I think for me it's just like
deepfakes.
Deepfakes, bowl filter, all this kind of shit. No, I think just in general, I'm also on a day-to-day basis, it varies. Like sometimes I'm like, oh my god, fuck this. It's gonna dull all our senses. We're just gonna be walking around pieces of flesh. But for the most part, I find myself getting a bit more optimistic in terms of even how it helps us do what we do. With regards to, I mean, our team, depending on project, scales up, scales down, but we're generally lean. And if you want to squeeze in more things to do for a lean team, this kind of thing sometimes makes sense. Cool.
Yeah. But cool.
Yeah.
Well, a very, very long, serious discussion about the future. But we always end with something a bit more lighthearted. There's a bit more of a human touch.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's called the one Shiok Thing.
The one Shiok Thing.
And we've already told you what it is. You know, I think you've had some time to think about it. But maybe we'll go first just to set the stage. Sure. So, Harish, what's your one Shiok Thing?
My one Shiok Thing is over the weekend. I just started watching The Expanse, the sci-fi TV show. I think it came out like maybe 6-7 years ago. I know Tristen recommended it to me along with some other friends. So, and I watched it, and it really is super good. And the whole story is that it's set in a time in the future where there's people on Earth, and that's more like the elitist crowd. There are people on Mars, which is like it runs its own colony, and there are belters like who live on the asteroid belt, which is primarily for mining water and resources. So the show starts where they're on the cusp of like what could turn into a war. Yeah, so it's like I heard it was good, and yet it still met my expectations. So yeah, and it's a show where I watched one episode, I can't wait to watch the next episode. So that's a good benchmark. So that's for me. The Expanse. It's on Amazon, I think. Amazon, yeah.
It used to be on Netflix, right? Then I think it got cancelled.
Oh, I don't know.
I think so, yeah.
It got cancelled?
As in, they didn't renew the...
Really?
And then Amazon...
Oh, then Amazon...
If I'm not wrong. If I'm not wrong.
Good shit, man. It's good
shit.
Yeah.
I want to watch it too, but yeah. My one-shot thing is actually an old book that I think a lot of people have read, Sapiens, by Yuval Harari, right? Have you read it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you read it as well? Yeah. I'm just coming to it, and yeah, every chapter is just blowing my mind when they talk about the fact like how as a Homo sapiens as a species, we literally only 70,000 years ago like started to like use our brains. So that's why talking about AI and all, it's like that might be the next big leap, like, that when we start attaching stuff to our brains and then making ourselves closer to, beyond Homo sapiens already, Homo something else, and like where the cusp, right? And so much progress in the last 200 years that there's so mind-blowing that our bodies still haven't even caught up yet. That to me feels like it really tells us like this whole AI revolution, it's gonna change a lot of things for us. Yeah.
And I think it's that book also that was the first time I realized that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived at the same time. Mm-hmm. It was not like Neanderthals first, then thousands of years later Homo sapiens, and Homo sapiens.
And they fucked, right? They fucked. And they fucked. Some fucked as well, yeah.
They fucked, and then they went to war.
Either, I don't know, it went to war just
died out.
Neanderthals died out. We don't know that, right?
Yeah. I was like, oh shit, that's interesting.
It's crazy, yeah. But then what the statistics?
But the one you remember is that they fucked.
Because 1% to 4%, I think, of humans in some study have some Neanderthal DNA. So there must have been some copulating going on.
I see. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. What's your one takeaway from Sapiens? Yeah, Neanderthal and Homo sapiens had sex. Yeah. What about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I think maybe a bit of a departure from AI, but over the weekend, I'm a big Arsenal fan.
Yeah.
They had an amazing
match, yeah.
It was 97th minute, they scored the winner. I think I got 3 heart attacks along the way, but it still kind of continued. And for me, it's just like that's that excitement of sport and the human kind of element of it. Because if we had robots playing each other, I feel like you could predict, okay, this one is running 20% faster, they're going to win.
Yeah.
But I think that unpredictability and that uncertainty, that is something that I think AI can never truly do, right? And when I ever think about what are humans good at and all these things, for me, sport is one thing that even humans make mistakes, but that's why sport we love to watch. Right, goalkeeper drops the ball, somebody does something they shouldn't, but it adds to the excitement of it. So having everything predictable, having everything, it's good for a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But there are other elements where the human piece really does matter.
Yeah.
And those are the things where I find as an AI guy, the human part often is sometimes more interesting. So the same stimulus for different humans results in a different output.
Yeah.
Which is a wild kind of, from an AI perspective, that's difficult to compute and answer.
Yeah.
But I think that's the beauty of humankind, the humanity, and the human experience.
So what if one day there was a pair of glasses you could put on that would give you Messi's mental reflexes? Like you can see a ball coming, there's something that you see that tells you, okay, kick the ball here or something like that, and that makes you a better player. Do you think that you would want players to have this kind of augmented kind of
like a Neuralink?
Yeah, like Neuralink, to allow them to make decisions faster or better decisions, or pass through this little gap here. You see it. Would you want your players to be able to wear something like that? Would you watch Premier League that way?
I would probably not like it as much.
Oh, you wouldn't like it?
Because I feel like the errors, the mistakes people make in general.
Yeah.
I think on the field it should be 11 guys against 11 guys. Because sometimes with sports, there's a lot of money involved.
Yeah.
Right? And to me, it kind of takes away a little bit from the spirit of the game. Right? So off the field, do all your analytics, do whatever you want, blah, blah, blah. But once we get on there, it's 11 guys against 11 guys. And that's true for any sport, right? You talk cricket, you talk whatever else. Do all your homework beforehand. But the sport itself, in my view, is 11 people, or if just tennis doubles, 2 people against 2 people. and two people have rackets. It's the ultimate equalizer, I feel. Right? Again, do whatever you want before, but once we get on that field, even the little guy can kind of come away and do something crazy, right? To me, that's the exciting part about sport.
Oh, dude, that's such an old school thing, man. I would
I'm a
totally
dinosaur, I'll take it.
No, but you're talking about you personally, but if you watch,
would I watch? It'll be, to me, it'll be less exciting. It's kind of like VAR right now, the way it's implemented. I just feel it breaks the flow of the game, and you can't celebrate a goal because like somebody says, "Oh, there's 1 foot there," and then even then it still feels so subjective, right?
But even then, half the time it's wrong.
Yeah.
That's the bit where I'm like, okay, if you're gonna do that, but your decisions are all right. I can understand the sacrifice, but half the time, like some human guy doesn't draw a line, and then you don't get a goal.
No, that's the crazy thing. Like from when everyone outside of the USA, we love football because it flows. It just flows as a game compared to whether it's basketball, American football. There's so many stoppages and rules and all that. But there's a flow in the game that's being broken right now by VAR. Like you can't celebrate something because you got to stop and wait for the referee to
part of the fun last time was like when it's a goal, they show the replay, it went past, but the referee didn't say it's a goal, and you're like, oh fuck this, And now, even just now when you're saying Arsenal scored in the 97th minute, part of me was like, wait, that's so weird. But now, because of all the stoppages for VAR, the extra time is a lot longer, right?
Even the World Cup, I found the World Cup, the amount of extra time was crazy. So sure, I think they're trying to make up for a lot of that stuff.
That's why they need AI to really help them with the VAR
so actually,
stuff.
The World Cup, the AI was actually quite good. They didn't wait for the line.
Okay.
It was actually an AI system that judged the offside. So they would literally just get like a beep on the watch or something, and they would show the video to the people.
Yeah.
But you would literally see the AI just makes its decision, and it's very clean. And there it's like, okay,
it was where it showed like one hand in front also is offside.
So then it's not like a VAR person drawing a manual line, no team of people there. It was literally like the AI makes the decision.
Oh wow.
So very cut and dry.
Yeah.
Right. So
but that didn't take away some of the romance of football for you. Dun, 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 dun.
There you go, right? I think to a certain extent, if the decision goes against your team, it's always taken away.
Fuck AI.
If Arsenal didn't score in the 97th minute, this would be a very different podcast.
And I'm a big Portugal fan, right? So I'm Portuguese nationality. World Cup when Portugal lost to Morocco, I'm still hurting from that. But in general, it's one of those where
sorry, but what was contentious about that game? Between Portugal and Morocco?
No, I guess what I'm saying is in the spirit of
in the spirit of
like a team like Morocco can beat Portugal, right? You don't think that can happen. But that's the beauty of even though it's painful for me, it's the beauty of the sport. Right? And then a whole continent unites and they're like, I might be from a different part of Africa, but I'm totally following Morocco. And you don't see that type of global spirit unity and a lot of other things. But sport, I think, is one of the few things that allows that to happen. So I think if you take away the romance of sport, you kind of lose a little bit of that too. And again, I'm saying that as a person who lost, right? I still feel like it hurt, but it's part of the game and part of the romance too. So
if you're Portuguese by nationality, are you Team Messi or Team Ronaldo?
I mean, okay, we can go on.
I know. This is going to be another podcast.
My one kind of sentence on this is, I think Ronaldo can be put into many different teams, and he's kind of still a machine. I think Messi sort of needs a little bit of a team around him to be able to do that. So for me, and this is my judgment, right? If it's a pickup game, 11 aside, and I have to make my first pick, okay, prime Ronaldo, prime Messi, I still pick prime Ronaldo. Because I know whoever else I pick, he's still going to be good. So that's my metric, because I play as well, right? So I would actually kind of think about it from that. But I mean, different people have their different views. Everyone's entitled to their own stupid opinion.
But after you pick him, he might go out and do an interview and says he doesn't want to play with you.
You're like, it's just 11 aside for fun. And he releases it to me, I play with Kevin. No, but I mean, I would say I'm still Team Ronaldo as well. But it's been because I'm not Portuguese. I just was a Man U fan. I am a Man U fan. But it became another podcast on its own. Cool, man.
Cool, man. Well, thanks so much for coming down and sharing this.
This was really fun, actually. I didn't even know. I felt like I didn't even have a mic and wasn't wearing this. We were just having a good conversation. So
it's the beauty of human to human interactions.
Okay, thanks so much, Kevin.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for listening. Adios.